Independent Media presents Grenada's only source for independent, unbiased, and well-researched broadcast journalism. This is the Bub Report with Dr. Kellon Bub.
Hello and welcome to the November 7th edition of the Bub Report. Last week, the main opposition National Democratic Congress Party in Grenada elected a new political leader at its October 31st virtual convention.
It is with a great sense of joy and humility that I stand here this evening to address you. I call you super delegates because you are superb and you have made a super decision today, the 31st of October 2021.
October 31st, a date which is also synonymous with the birthday of the late George Buzan, a founding member of the party and former Prime Minister of Grenada, and 3 days shy of the anniversary of the death of Sir Nicholas Brathwaite on October 20th, 2016. Brathwaite was the NDC's incumbent Prime Minister from 1990 to 1995. Deacon Mitchell and the New Look executive is a literal and metaphoric break from the past, as the executive now consists primarily of young people under the age of 50. Mitchell and his neophyte team are hoping to change the party's political fortunes, which has lost 2 consecutive elections in the 21st century by way of a 15-0 thumping from the incumbent New National Party. In the last 10 years, the party also shuffled 3 leaders, Nazim Burke, Franca Bernardine, and interim political leader Adrian Thomas. Deacon Mitchell is hard-pressed to unify a political organization that has witnessed historic internecine conflicts in the late 1990s, as well as during its last stint in government that led to the expulsion of several high-profile members, including Peter David, Chester Humphrey, Ali Gill, Joseph Gilbert, and Glennis Roberts 8 years ago in September of 2012. There are still contemporary atavisms of the era of disunity in the camp, as one of its long-standing delegates, Wade Phillip, is expected to officially quit the organization on November 8th in the wake of last week's convention, citing lack of due process and accountability at last week's event.
And I think there's a new trend that is trending within the party. I mean, the surrogates of the new leader, I wouldn't blame it on him, but the surrogates of him have been promoting the youth. Yes, the youth need to be involved, but they are in the process, they are condemning the older ones, and we feel ostracized.
The reaction to Mitchell's election at the helm has been swift across Grenada. Social media has been abuzz with sentiments from both sides of the political spectrum about what this new NDC dispensation would mean for the country.
And you have a new leader, inexperienced though he may be, but he has come and within 72 hours, he started selling things in the sky.
Yes.
He's a hard worker, he sets a good example, and importantly, he has vision.
Some people have learned some serious lessons about politics. They would learn. They would learn. It might be easy to buy a political party, but it's not easy to buy the people of Grenada, Carrick.
This week on our program, we examine the significance and implications of the election of NDC's new leader for Grenada's political landscape, and whether or not his meteoric rise to leadership will bring an end to the state of political apathy found among Grenada's youthful population. We will sit down with Mitchell for an extensive, deep dive conversation on the issues affecting Grenada's socioeconomic development, as well as his plans for managing an economy ravaged by COVID-19. We welcome our guests, Deacon Mitchell, political leader of the National Democratic Congress; William Joseph, political commentator and former executive member of the NDC; Kem Jones, political activist and radio talk show host; and Peter Wickham, political scientist and pollster. We thank you for joining us. A good Sunday morning from our Washington, D.C. location. Before we get to our first guest, I wish to extend my deepest condolences to the family of my former PBC Grenada classmate, Crispin McIntosh, who died suddenly last week at his home in Tempe, St. George. Crispin and I entered the Presentation College as classmates and left as friends and brothers, a friendship that lasted for many years. Up to the time of his death, Chris maintained a very close and collegial relationship with his PBC peers. He was indeed one of the kindest, most generous human beings that I've gotten to know over the years. And he was also an avid follower of the Bub Report. May he rest in peace, and may his memory be a blessing. And now, Deacon Mitchell's rise has given way to a torrent of commentary on social media last week concerning his lack of political experience. The hardline sympathizers of the NDC view Mitchell's political inexperience as an expedient advantage to their chances at the polls, which has been dealt a bad hand in 2 successive elections. Political apologists on the other side of the aisle are on the other hand chomping at the bit to take several jabs at Deacon's very green approach to the Machiavellian landscape of Grenadian politics, dominated by the former competitive national cricketer from the Northwest, who is the record holder for the most electoral wins in post-revolutionary Grenadian political history. Whatever the merits and motivation behind the debate, here are some facts about previous entrants into frontline Grenadian politics. On his return to the country in 1984, the current Prime Minister of Grenada just turned the age of 38 when he won the St. George's Northwest seat and assumed the role of Minister of Works under his boss, the late Prime Minister Herbert Augustus Blaise. He became the political leader of the NNP in 1989 after what some historians framed as a political coup that toppled the ailing 71-year-old Blaise, who died later that year. Mitchell then won the 1995 election at the tender age of 49, making him the second youngest prime minister after Maurice Bishop, who assumed the leadership of Grenada when he was only 34. Similarly, Sir Eric Matthew Gary led Grenada's first proletariat revolutionary uprising, recorded in history as Sky Red, against the white planter class at the age of 29 in 1951. The charismatic Gary then led Grenada to political independence at the age of 51 in 1974, notwithstanding the organized labor, legislative and executive experience he amassed during this time. The big caveat here is that these leaders acquired some political and public service experience before assuming the role of leaders of their various political organizations, before going on to serve as the prime ministers of Grenada. This chronological retelling of Grenada's political history isn't a mere rebuttal of the experienced talking points that have emerged. It is fair game to question whether or not one's age can translate into qualities of maturity, readiness to lead, and discipline to stay the course. Has Grenada suffered due to the over-exuberant political ambitions of these under 50s in the past that led Grenada during some of its most turbulent and historic times? Are we going to learn from history, or are we doomed to repeat the same mistakes of the past? However, we here at the Bub Report will continue to call balls and strikes on this and other issues that demand impartial and dispassionate examination from an independent media. Let us watch this space. A pleasant good morning again to my viewers and listeners of the Bub Report. As a reminder for our viewers and listeners in North America, we did have a fallback last night in terms of time, so therefore the Bub Report will be streamed from 10 a.m. Eastern Time, and the time in Grenada and the Eastern Caribbean will remain the same at 11 a.m. But at this time, I am happy to be joined by Mr. Deacon Mitchell, the recently elected political leader of the National Democratic Congress. And we want to have an extensive, deep dive conversation today on the issues that affect the Grenadian public, the bread and butter issues that matter to the people at this very difficult time in Grenadian history. And at this time, I wish to take this opportunity to welcome Mr. Deacon Mitchell to the Bub Report. Mr. Mitchell, welcome to the program.
Good morning, Kellon. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for having me. Good morning to all of your listeners and viewers as well. Pleasant Sunday morning to them.
Absolutely. I suspect this has been a very busy week for you, sir, and you probably, at this time, probably very tired with a lot of the media interviews, but this is the world of politics. I suspect you probably know that by now.
I know that by now. I'm not tired with the interviews. I think they're just getting started, so I look forward to more of them. I look forward to continuing to engage with journalists, with media. It's a democracy, and the media is the fourth estate. So I wish to encourage and I welcome the opportunity to dialogue with the media.
Absolutely, Mr. Mitchell. So what we want to do for this program is that we want to dissect our conversation into four parts.
Sure.
We're going to talk about party unity and organization. Then we will get into a conversation about the post-COVID Grenadian economy. Then we will talk about health and wellness. And of course, we will talk about social issues affecting the national economy of the country. So welcome, fasten your seatbelts because we are about to go. All right, Mr. Mitchell, the first question. Last week, there's been a major resignation from one of your constituency branches, namely from St. George's Northwest. Some may say, well, the Northwest is not a significant constituency in the grand scheme of things. But my question to you is, sir, what would unifying your party look like moving forward? As it is perceived by some in your own organization that your election was more so a coronation instead of an earned position based on merit. you've not spent a lot of time in the party, Mr. Mitchell, in the way that others have, who are saying that probably they labored in the vineyard for many, many years. What makes, therefore, such a rookie like yourself ready for prime time?
So let me start by addressing the issue of unification of the party. That is a singular goal of mine, and that's a singular goal, I think, of each member of the National Democratic Congress. The convention process was a fair, transparent, democratic process. All of the parties all of the delegates who had the opportunity to attended, voted. The convention came about after an extensive build-up leading to the convention, where persons, not just myself, but all of the candidates who offered themselves to serve on the national executive had the opportunity to meet with delegates, to meet with party membership, and to present their case as to why they should be given the opportunity to serve. And offering oneself to serve on the national executive is really about service. So at the end of the day, the delegates would have made decisions based on what was presented to them by the persons who were offering themselves to serve. The delegates would have made their decisions based on what is in the best interest of the National Democratic Congress. And the delegates would have made their decisions based on what's in the best interest of Grenada. And so you would observe that many of the persons who were appointed to the national executive did so overwhelmingly. In my case, it was not a coronation. There were two other persons who took part in the process and offered themselves for service. The delegates would have had the opportunity to meet with them, to hear them, to see them, to look at what they...
Well, yes, I would push you on that. Yes, you're saying it's not a coronation, Deacon, Mr. Mitchell, but the leadership search committee, if you will, made recommendations that you proceed with becoming the lead of the party. On the eve of the convention, there was talk about, well, why don't the other two people who were contesting the leadership step down?
Yeah. Persons have to make decisions as they see fit. The two persons did not step down. They took part in the race. And frankly, whether or not they made that decision to step down or not to step down would have been a decision that they needed to own. The leadership search committee is not the delegates. The persons who decide who sit on a national executive are the delegates, and the delegates made that determination. And let me say, in my case, you would have observed, for example, that I had no media comment. I did not appear on any media.
Well, we did invite you to the Bob Report, and you didn't.
And that's
at the time.
And there's a precise reason for that, because with all due respect to the media, with all due respect to the leadership committee, the persons who matter in this process are the delegates. And therefore, I chose deliberately to spend my time interacting with the delegates, speaking with them, hearing from them as to their vision for what the National Democratic Congress ought to become, as to how we unify the party, as to how we overcome the challenges of the past to move forward in a united front. So I would have gotten the opportunity to interact with the delegates, to meet with them, to speak with them, to communicate with them, to give them an opportunity to get to know me. And after they had that opportunity, then they would have had the right to exercise their franchise, which they did. So this was, and I want to say this because I think it's important, not just for the National Democratic Congress, but this was truly an opportunity as well for the nation of Grenada to learn about civics, to learn about political parties, to understand how you become a delegate, why it is important to take part in or become a member of a political party, why it is important to pay attention to who serves or who becomes elected on a national executive within a party, why it is important to pay attention to whom and how you become the political leader of a party. And I think the convention process gave an opportunity for Grenadians to pay attention, for Grenadians to become interested in our national affairs, in our politics, in our civics. And for that, in fact, I think the National Democratic Congress should be commended, because I certainly don't know that in recent history that as much attention has been paid to those issues, so that particularly the next generation of Grenadians understand why it is important to take part in the political process.
Okay, Deacon, next question. Now, the NDC has been historically beleaguered by internecine infighting in the past. I'm sure that's something you are aware of.
Yes.
Factionalism started in the late 1990s in the Brizan and Alexis era and continued well into the Burke, Tillman Thomas, and Peter David era of the party. Yes. In fact, the last set of new recruits into the party, which included Peter David, were unceremoniously expelled close to a decade ago. Yes. How do you avoid this issue that has dogged the party in the past?
Right. Well, let me say this, and that's why the convention was important. The delegates gave me an overwhelming mandate. My job, therefore, is to lead the party, to continue the unification of the party. And crucially, let me say this, because I think a lot of unfounded statements have been made regarding some suggestion that there are factions or I have surrogates or there are persons who are in some way pushing aside all the members of the party. That is absolutely false. That is not true. In fact, part of the reason that I made the decision to get involved in the National Democratic Congress and I made the decision to offer myself to serve and ultimately to become its leader was because I was encouraged significantly by a lot of the older members of the National Democratic Congress, by a lot of the stalwarts who openly said that it was time for another generation of Grenadians to get involved actively in the political life of the country. So I've been encouraged by them. I've been mentored by them. I'm in constant and open dialogue with them. I intend to continue doing so. The other members of the executive are doing so. The rank and file of the National Democratic Congress across all age ranges have been reaching out to me, speaking to me, encouraging me. And I'm satisfied that the party will go forward united. I'm satisfied that the party is clear on the agenda it needs to pursue in order to be successful at the elections. And I'm satisfied that we will do that.
Okay. Now, Deacon, what principles would guide the selection of NDC candidates for the next general election? And in what constituency would we be seeing Deacon Mitchell banners and flyers representing your own candidacy? I know I'm probably thinking ahead, but the Prime Minister can decide that he's going to call the election tomorrow.
Yes. Well, I was going to tease you and say that you see banners and flyers of Deacon Mitchell in every constituency in Grenada. But let me say this. The principle, in a nutshell, the outcome is that we need to win the election. There's no question of that. And so, in a sense, we start at that point and we work backwards. In order to win the election, we need to present candidates who are hardworking, who understand that representation of persons and our people means service to them. It means you have to reflect their views. It means you have to be empathetic to the situation they find themselves in. And crucially, you have to be prepared to offer solutions to help them improve their lives. And so those are the principles that will guide the selection of candidates, because ultimately the National Democratic Congress must win the election if it is to be able to govern and if it is able to, and in order for it to be able to implement the policies that we think Grenada need to see. As to where I intend to run, I have not decided finally on that as yet, but once I make that determination, Kilon, rest assured, I will communicate that to you.
Well, that has to be a determination made by the rank and file of the party. That's not necessarily a determination that you make as well. I mean, in consultation with the rank and file of the party.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a process for selecting persons who run. Essentially, it starts at the constituency level and works its way up. So that's when I say the determination hasn't been made. Obviously, it's not a determination that I simply sit in a chair and make. It's a determination that will be made in the best interest of the party. And obviously, that necessarily means the rank and file.
All right. And the final question for this segment, Mr. Mitchell, some are implying that the next election might be one of the most expensive in Grenadian history, since CBI investors may view candidates as proxies to guard their economic interests on the island. What assurances can you give the Grenadian people that, first, you did not buy the NDC as your opponent intimated in Parliament last week, and secondly, in the absence of campaign finance reform in the country, how will you raise funds for the next election beyond the notion of selling bakes and fish cakes, as one NNP surrogate intimated as a fundraising model?
Yeah. So, Kilon, let me say this, because we need to understand the importance and the value of our democracy. Notions that people can buy and sell political parties, notion that people can buy and sell votes, and notions that people can buy and sell our elections ought to be rejected outright. And I reject that outright. We live in a society where we promote an individual's right to choose, an individual's right to associate with a particular political organization or not. And when one joins a political party, it is about service. It is about willingness to help improve our society. When I joined the National Democratic Congress, that was the sole motivating factor. I did not spend a penny other than the gas bill of driving through the length and breadth of Grenada to meet with the persons that matter. And so even on a national scale and for electoral process, all of us who are involved in this process need to ensure that, one, we send the right message, that it is about the value of our democracy. It is about the value of our people. It's about the value of the things we hold dear to us as Grenadians. And that re-emphasizing that is important. Second, by our actions, we need to demonstrate that while we accept that campaigns may be expensive, that resources are put into them, that our democracy, our freedom, the things we hold dear to us cannot be bought and sold, whether it's by CBI investors, local investors, or foreign investors. So I can assure you that certainly, as long as I am involved in national politics, that anyone who wants to donate or fund or help a campaign must be prepared to do so on the basis that they believe in the policies, they believe in the things that the political organization that I'm heading intends to do. The National Democratic Congress will never be bought or sold.
Well, I will be watching the space on that, but we will come back. We will take a quick break, viewers and listeners, and we will be right back with more questions for the new political leader of the National Democratic Congress. Stand by. We'll be right back.
So it's not a legal schooling. I know you're sensitive to people schooling you on the law, but I think I can trump you when it comes to the history of Grenada.
What you're saying is that this resignation was expected? Would it be fair to say that you abdicated your responsibility by not showing up in Parliament on Friday?
We are not aware of the terms of the agreement.
But then how can you say the terms are not favorable? Don't know the terms.
We love old talk, we love gossip, we love brango, we love all them kind of things in the Caribbean.
If I cannot play music, I don't know how I'm going to live.
We are borrowing money to pay debt because of corruption, waste, and mismanagement.
That they have difficulty with your leadership. Why then are you contesting the presidency? And welcome back, folks. I'm joined today by the political leader, the newly minted political leader of the National Democratic Congress, himself also, like myself, a past student of the Presentation Brothers College. Deacon, before we get to the next segment quickly, just a PBC trivia here. Fimba, Patrician, Dominican, or Aquinian? What house were you affiliated with at the school? Please don't say Fimba.
No, it's not Fimba, and I'm not sure I want to answer. Dominican.
Oh, well, I'm a Dominican man as well, so at least we're on the same team where that is concerned. Yes. All right, Mitchell, let's get to the post-COVID Grenadian economy. That's the next thematic segment of our interview here. Now, you've been doing a delegate dance around the issue of mandatory COVID-19 vaccinations in your public utterances last week. In fact, anti-vax advocates on Ireland, some of whom are aligned and have sympathies to your own party, have expressed the view that by continuing to represent SGU, that you're taking on a principle, that you're not taking a principled stance rather on the issue. And you say vaccination should not be mandatory. But the Public Health Act does in fact make it mandatory for children to be immunized against communicable disease. COVID, like measles, mumps, rubella, are also communicable disease. Why not take a firm position on the issue?
Yes. So, Kelon, let me start by addressing this. And I think it's important that we not lump the COVID-19 virus with the traditional childhood viruses. Mm-hmm. One, a child cannot consent. A child cannot give consent. And so to a large extent, the traditional requirement that children are required to be vaccinated against things like measles, mumps, rubella, that consent is in fact given by the child's parent. That's one. Two, you cannot, and one ought not to make the mistake between children immunization and adult immunization. To a large extent, the question of vaccination up until the availability of the Pfizer vaccines is a question as to whether a state can compel its adult population to be vaccinated. Now, I've indicated it may sound like a delicate dance, but I think we need to understand this is a complex issue. And we should not pretend that it's not complex by thinking you have a one-shoe-fit-all size. Let's face the facts. The facts are a majority of the Grenadian population has chosen not to become vaccinated. When you are involved in public service and when you get involved in politics in a democratic society, you need to pay attention to the views of the majority of the citizens. anyone who has to implement policy or make decisions must heed that. So unfortunately, I think we've locked ourselves into a debate where we are disuniting our population and creating vaxxers against anti-vaxxers. The fact is we are all citizens of Grenada. We all have the right to live in Grenada, and we all have the right to be protected under law in Grenada. So for me, the real issues we need to face is how do we get out of the situation that we've regrettably found ourselves in? And to me, that requires, as I've been saying, deep discussion and consultation with our population as to what are the best options available to all of us collectively so we can move the country out of, in my view, a disuniting and unproductive debate about to vax or not to vax. Because the reality is, if the majority of the population has made the decision that it will not vax, respectfully, from a practical perspective, the state will not be able to force them to become vaccinated. And those who are currently holding the reins of power, in my view, need to face that reality and ask ourselves, and how do we move beyond that so that we can begin the process of healing and begin the process of trying to move out of the state of deadlock or gridlock that we found ourselves in. I mean, those are the issues that we need to be addressing. It may be that with time, that with continued education, that with continued persuasion, more and more citizens will become vaccinated. But the fact is, locking ourselves into a debate as to the vax against the unvax is unhelpful. It might be unproductive. And let's face the reality, it hasn't significantly moved the needle in terms of the number of persons who become vaccinated.
And it hasn't. And let's unpack that for a little bit, because I have been critical, by the way, and they're saying, commenters and suggesting that why I don't go ask Keith that question. Well, if you know my record, you would know that I am hard on both sides. I am unbossed, and uncompromised in that way. But let us reflect on the public education campaign relative to the government of Grenada and encouraging using moral suasion to vaccinate. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think that that the public health campaign should have been more robust, so as to get people a better understanding of vaccinations?
It certainly should have been more robust. It should have been more multifaceted, and it certainly should have been led by the healthcare professionals. And we need to face that reality. We have a trust deficit when it comes to politicians. Not just in Grenadian society, but I think in significant parts of the world. And when you allow politicians to drive issues concerning healthcare, medicine, it creates almost an immediate block in person's mind, because if they don't trust you, they simply, even if it's in their even if it's in their best interests, you may very well find that they will simply resist what they're being told simply because it's coming from a politician. And given this sort of anxiety, given the unprecedented nature of the COVID-19 disease and virus on us all, to me, the vaccination effort, the vaccination policy programs, the rollout of the vaccination should really have been led by our healthcare professionals, our doctors, our nurses, particularly some of our private doctors, because you have to recognize that Grenadians tend to have a lot of trust and confidence in the particular physician they tend to see. So to me, they should have been called upon and should have been the ones leading the call for persons to be vaccinated, leading the call in terms of educating the population on the pros and cons of the vaccine, and doing so in a respectful and empathetic manner. I think merely appearing on television and extolling the virtues of vaccines would not work. You need to go into the communities. You need to sit and listen to the persons. You need to understand why they're hesitant, and how can you help in overcoming that? And I think if that
correct,
taken.
Yes, and I concur with you there. I'm a professor of health communication, and that is one of the blind spots with respect to not only Grenada, but in the way that, for example, the Minister of Health and other public health officials would always say, get vax, get vax, get vax, without also having an understanding of the risks and benefits of vaccination and educating the people with respect to what those risks and benefits are, but also going on listening tours, as was done in Barbados, right? Hearing from the public, seeing what conspiracy theories are out there, correcting that misinformation. I didn't mean to cut you, but please proceed.
No, and that's fine. And I'll give you an example. Given that just the way in which vaccines were rolled out, and the question of whether or not the vaccine manufacturers would ever face any liability in the event something went wrong. Just that sort of blanket immunity that they were given, that in and of itself would have made many persons hesitant. And so the policymakers ought to recognize that, because the question would be, look, if something goes wrong with me, they're saying the vaccine manufacturers are essentially getting away. No one is going to hold them liable. No one is going to hold them accountable. And when people hear that, you then have to be able to address that, explain why it was done that way, explain if in fact any redress would be possible. And those are some of the issues that ought to have been addressed, in my view, on a one-on-one community village level. There are other aspects of how the vaccine rollout was done that, again, should have been, in my view, community-based. Now, you can't just simply have pop clinics in areas on the main road, let's say Foodland car park and so on, because how many people live in Lagoon Road? You have to actually go into the communities, into the villages, where one person can bring another one, where someone who's hesitant can have a conversation with someone who actually went. So again, to me, it should have been community-oriented. It should have been ground up. And I think if that approach was taken, then the numbers would, in my view, have been significantly larger.
You said ground there. You're making me get into another conversation here on pedagogy and Paulo Freire and things like that. But let us get to the next topic, Mr. Mitchell, and that has to do with economic transformation. Yes. Now, one of the issues that Grenada has to grapple with in the next 2 decades is a shrinking population that will greatly reduce the social safety net capacity of the National Insurance Scheme. In fact, the 2019 Independent Actuarial Review said that the operational deficit of the fund would continue to increase after 2029, and the reserve will be completely depleted by 2042. That's not a long time. Now, the main recommendations of the actuarial review were to do a couple things. First, increase the retirement age from 60 to 65. You would have some convincing there to do. Increase the contribution rates to 11%, 5% employee, 6% employer. There are particular gaps in that system right now where some employees are accusing employers of not paying into the NIS fund for them on their behalf. Now, the current rate for contribution is 9%. The actuaries are recommending that increase significantly. Now, and also they also are recommended that there has to be an increase in the insurable limit gradually, given that current limits were very small for high income brackets. Now, do you agree with these recommendations? And how does one achieve economic transformation given this particular bleak outlook?
Right. So, well, let me say this. I mean, obviously, the review is an actuarial review. To a large extent, I think it was focusing on the numbers as to how you address the potential deficit. But I think before we get to just an actuarial review, there may be more fundamental policy issues as to the role NIS plays in the economy as a social safety net. And I'm not so sure that the review paid attention to that. Questions as to the type of benefits, whether there should be a streamlining of the benefits, whether we need to review the role of NIS in its entirety. I heard no mention, for example, of the investment policy of NIS. That to me is also critical. Because we must recognize that if you are saying, for example, move the age of retirement from 60 to 65, that has implications for persons who would have planned their lives thinking that they would retire at 60. If you say move the contributions from 9 to 11%, again, that has implications for what people take home. If you say the thresholds need to be increased, particularly for persons in the high income bracket, again, what level of consultation went into that to get a sense of how compliant persons are prepared to be, given that you may already have a compliance issue, even with lower thresholds and with lower percentages. So I would say this, I am not one who will sit in an armchair and criticize the actuarial review, because I think there's a particular science involved in that. But I think there has to be a broader debate and a broader discussion about the role of the National Insurance Scheme, about its investment policy, and how we see the NIS in the broader context, particularly of a safety net. Because there are questions we could ask, for example, should we prioritize pensions over something like sick leaves? Right? I'm aware that there is, to some extent, quite a fair amount of abuse of the sick leave benefits, where persons actually are genuinely sick, but they're able to get medical reports that says so, and then you're able to get time off. And as a nation, we need to understand the impact of those things on the wider issue. So I think consultations are probably required. We need to get a sense of what are the priority areas that NIS needs to address. And I'm just using that purely as a theoretical example as to whether, for example, if we had to rank the goods and services that NIS offers, and I'm using goods and services loosely here, do we rank pensions over sick pay? Do we rank sick pay over pensions? Do we rank disability benefits over sick pay? Because those are some of the things that we may need to look at. Do we rank unemployment benefits? No, traditionally, NIS did not provide unemployment benefits. There has been temporary, so to speak, introduction of unemployment benefits as a result of COVID-19. So those are some of the issues we need to address. How has the introduction of temporary unemployment benefits impacted on the fund's revenue base, given the comments already made by the actuarial science? So, and that's why I'm saying when these things are being done, it's important that there should be broad-based consultation, because ultimately the institution and the fund was set up to improve the lives of Grenadians and to provide safety nets in instances when there's disruption and where you stop working and you're retired. And as I've said, obviously, when you are older and you're retired, you are more vulnerable generally, and particularly health issues tend to take a greater significance in your life. So we want to ensure that the fund is successful, that the fund is sustained. So those are some of the issues that I think we'd have to pay attention to.
And now you mentioned economic transformation primarily in agriculture and technology. What specific policy directives do you believe would revive the Grenadian economy in the immediate aftermath of this major public health crisis?
Well, I would say this, Kelon, people keep using the word aftermath. I don't know that COVID-19 is going away. There's no indication of that. So I think
But at some point, we have to get to a place where we have to reimagine what the Grenadian economy would look like when this virus, of course, it's not going anywhere. It is endemic globally. But right. The point is, while it is not going anywhere, we have to learn to live with the virus. Now, in learning to live with the virus, how do we move on with our lives?
And that's the point I was making, that I think we need
yes.
to accept that moving on with our lives in effect starts now. And I think just from a resource allocation point of view, if you look at our national budgets over several years, perhaps decades now, you would understand that agriculture consistently has been allocated some of the lowest percentage of the budgetary allocations. Given our significant high food import bill, given the fact that makes us vulnerable, we're a small island state. It is quite clear to me that a starting point from a policy directive is that we, in fact, need to realign the budgetary allocation to ensure that agriculture, in fact, is given the prominence that I think it deserves, to ensure that we place Grenada in a position of sustainability when we look at our food security, and ensuring that, in fact, we take advantage of our competitive advantage. And I've said, for instance, we used to be known as the Isle of Spice. Why have we abandoned what obviously historically has been a competitive advantage to us? Why? Why have we pursued, in a sense, a lot of non-productive capital projects? We've spent a lot of resources on building things like stadiums, which we can't even maintain. How is it revenue generating? How is it creating sustained and sustainable employment? So clearly the productive sectors needs to be re-energized. That is where the employment will come from. That is where the sustainability will come from. I've said repeatedly, and Kelon, let me say this, we are not reinventing the wheel. There is a National Sustainable Development Plan. A National Sustainable Development Plan, and I will urge all Grenadians to become familiar with it. We in the National Democratic Congress intend to use the plan. We intend to educate Grenadians about the plan. That is very comprehensive, prepared by Grenadians after extensive consultations with Grenadians, that addresses almost every aspect of our economic and social life. That plan, the implementation of that plan should have been from 2020, being built out to 2035, 15 years. 2020 has come and gone. Granted, COVID would have provided disruption, but on a national level, there has been no discussion whatsoever about implementing that plan. And if we simply start there, all of the things that we need to do, from agriculture, energy, education, skills training, the marine environment, the blue economy, the green economy, the orange economy, the silver economy. All of it is there. And that's part of the challenge we have in our society, where we undertake extensive research. We get long and detailed reports about how to effect change in our society. And then the reports simply sit on a shelf. It is really the lack of willingness, the lack of leadership, the lack of desire to implement that which we know should be done that puts us in the position that we're in. So I'm saying this to say, if we start from that plan, and it's a plan, and obviously you'd have to tweak it in light of the fact that COVID-19 has occurred. It is quite easy, in fact, to jumpstart the post-COVID economy, because the plan, in fact, was scheduled to be implemented from 2020. We're in 2021, we're going into 2022 shortly. So even if we say we've lost 2 years, it is not a long time. We can make that up. And again, but that is where you see, in order to change your society, you have to educate your people. You have to get them involved. You have to energize them. You have to say to them, this is the plan. This is where we are heading. These are our goals. We did this after extensive consultation with
and I think the Grenada Revolution, for students of history, the Grenada Revolution attempted to do that. I mean,
Yes.
every year during that period, regardless of what side of the political aisle you fall under with respect to the revolution, every year was a particular year for something, whether it was the year for production, whether it was a year for agriculture, whether it was a year for infrastructure. You also had Center for Popular Education programs, several adult literacy programs in the community, and they were able to do that. So it's really good to hear you say that. But speaking up in there, you mentioned infrastructure. One of the things that I am very passionate about has to do with environmental preservation. Now in Grenada, we have witnessed the decimation of several ecologically sensitive areas of the country. We're talking parts of Lasajas, we're talking parts of Mount Hartman, we also now talking parts of Livera, in which we are seeing massive infrastructural development taking place there by way of tourism investments. Now, how do you go down on the side of balancing ecological preservation with an environmental preservation with infrastructural development, especially in places that are ecologically sensitive to Grenada's ecological identity, if you will?
Well, I think the starting point is looking at what it is you want to achieve. What is important? What do you want to preserve? Bearing in mind that economic development obviously is desirable. And once you start there, then you need to put the policy and legislative framework in place to ensure that development takes place within that framework. You want development that leads to a sustainable environment. You want development that doesn't desecrate the environment. And crucially, you want to ensure, and sometimes there may be some element of destruction, there may be some element of desecration, but you want to ensure that you minimize that. And crucially, you actually want to ensure that the development itself occurs. Because what you don't want is a situation where you have disruption to the natural environment because you say you're building a hotel, and 15 or 20 years later, there is no hotel. So it is absolutely important that the right balance is formed, and it is absolutely important that the development...
But there is a proposed land use policy in place that has been shelved for many years. We hear talk about implementing this land use policy. I think there is a guiding framework, but
so it goes back to what I said earlier: the lack of will to implement, the lack of leadership to ensure that it is done, and the unwillingness to hold the persons who have the ability to ensure that it happens accountable. And that permeates our society, unfortunately, in several aspects. If we don't hold ourselves accountable, if we don't hold our leaders accountable, then this sort of thing will continue to happen. And so it is absolutely important. The media plays its role, that individual citizens play its role, and that the government plays, in fact, the leading role, because ultimately, if you are representing the people, and the people are concerned about the environment, we accept it's a desired goal to have an environment that is sustainable, an environment in which we don't dump garbage indiscriminately, an island that is clean, that we do not wish to pollute our waterways, etc. if we accept those are desirable things, and I think all of us accept those are desirable things, then it's up to us collectively and government to implement. It's not just to talk, to implement. And that's part of the challenge, I think, that has happened to us as a people. We've gotten to a point where we talk, but we don't start with ourselves in terms of making ourselves accountable. And so once you don't make yourself accountable, you're not in a position to make anyone else accountable or to hold anyone else accountable. And so from that, and I'm saying this from that perspective, Kellon, because let's take an example. When we go to our beaches and we see the level of garbage that we leave, right? Those are things we need to start addressing on an individual basis. I mean, if you go to places like BBC and you look at the amount of plastic and so on that's left on the beach, we collectively leave that there. And so if we care about the environment, it starts with us, and each of us need to ensure that Grenada belongs to us and we start actually taking care of it. And that way, particularly when you have foreign investors coming in, we would have already set the tone that we care about the environment, that we care about the areas that are sensitive. And if you're going to do development, that the development must be done in a manner that takes into consideration local concerns, local considerations, that takes into consideration the environment, that ensures that as least damage as possible is done to the environment as we continue to develop. Because at the end of the day, and I keep saying that, you know, the earth will probably eventually be fine. It's us that will not be fine. If we continue to build in low-lying areas, if we build in sensitive areas, it is all buildings that eventually would be flooded. You know, when the hurricanes come, it's the buildings that are going to be destroyed, and we are the ones that are going to be facing the consequences of our actions. So I say this, implementation is key. And particularly when it comes to foreign direct investment, if we do not clearly indicate what our stance is, clearly point out what our standards are, clearly point out what is important, then it's a free fall. And persons eventually sometimes make it up as you go along. But it is also important, because I want to say this, we have to strengthen and make sure that we pay attention to the technocrats and the persons with subject matter expertise in guiding us in some of those things. Too often, we live in a world where everyone is an expert and everyone simply mouths off without actually demonstrating that they have the expertise to help us make the best decisions for all of us as Grenadians. So I will tell you, I will never pretend I'm not a journalist. I will never pretend that I should be schooling a journalist on anything from journalistic ethics to technique or so. Similarly, I would expect that when it comes to the law, that a journalist will probably defer to me if I've been a lawyer with 20 years expertise. And I think as a society, we also need to recognize that when it comes ultimately to making decisions, we need to listen to the persons who have the expertise, one, two, who have the best interests of the country at heart, because that is also important. And then hopefully from that process, we would then be able to make the right decision on behalf of our collective behalf.
Subject matter expertise, a very important point you raised, because sometimes in Westminster developing economy democracies, we tend to appoint political hacks as opposed to people who are experts in their field to manage particular sectors. So let us see how that's going to unfold under a Deacon Mitchell administration. But moving on here, Mr. Mitchell, politicians tend to promise lower taxes if and when elected, as well as lower the cost of living on basic consumer items.
Yeah.
Essential bread and butter issues, if you will, right? Now, would you agree or disagree with eliminating the value-added tax altogether if elected into office? The backdrop of this is the runaway inflation that we're seeing around the world, the exponential rise in cost of basic consumer items in Grenada. I can't tell you how many people I hear complaining about that. And also, in that vein, should there be a taxation policy that taxes wealthier Grenadians as opposed to a tax rate that works against the interest of working people? Where do you go down on that issue?
Right. So, well, you've asked a number of questions in there. So let me say this. Obviously, the government depends on its revenue almost exclusively from taxation. I think the type of tax system we have in Grenada collectively is a little too complex. We have a multitude of various taxes. And I think one of the things we therefore need to look at is how we, in fact, simplify the entire tax system. It will be reckless and irresponsible of me to sit here and say that VAT should be eliminated simply because the cost of living is high. The cost of living in Grenada is undoubtedly high. And to a large extent, it's driven by the fact that we import significantly most of our food. And we have to recognize that. So what I think has to be done, Kellon, is that we have to have a comprehensive review of our taxation system. We have to understand what we use our tax revenues for. And at the appropriate time, clearly, a clear goal of any government should be to implement measures that will reduce the cost of living for its citizens. That goal, I think everyone will accept, is desirable. The question is, how do we get there? And so you can't just simply say eliminate one tax when the government, for example, is the single biggest employer. If you eliminate the VAT, for instance, and the government has no revenue to pay its public servants, has no revenue to pay its teachers, have no revenue to pay its police officers, well, we have a far bigger problem than just the cost of living, because essentially you are saying there are people who have no employment. So the reality is this: we have to engage in a systematic and sustained approach to our development that will allow us to drive down the cost of living, but crucially also allow us to increase persons' take-home pay, person's income, so that ultimately we have a higher standard of living in Grenada. And those are complex issues that we can't necessarily solve in a 5-minute discussion. But I will also make that point and go back to the point about subject matter experts. Ultimately, as a politician, you are there to represent the people. You are not an expert on everything. And it is therefore important on complex matters like taxation, on complex matters like why our cost of living is this high, that in fact you engage, you get the right advice, and then you make the best decision in the interest of the state, in the interest of the government, and in the interest of the citizens.
Okay, Mr. Mitchell, we will take a quick break, and when we come back, we will get into the very important conversation of health and wellness. So apt, especially now, given the COVID crisis that we are experiencing and the deficiencies in the system that needs to be addressed. Stand by. Since losing that seat, what have you been up to?
Now, Mr. Attorney General, this particular provision sounds unconstitutional. But why were there not consultations before moving forward with the proposals? Did they say what will happen when you guys get to St. Vincent? Because there are pressing socio-economic issues that I would want to address with you.
In the hyper-information age of social media, the Bub Report knows there is more to the story. We have questions and demand answers. We strive to hold the powerful accountable and tell an unbiased, contextual story. You know what happened. We let you know why it happened. There is always more to the story. The Bub Report, streaming every Sunday at 11 a.m. on Facebook and YouTube.
So it's not a legal schooling. I know you're sensitive to people schooling you on the law, but I think I can trump you when it comes to the history of Grenada.
What you're saying is that this resignation was expected? Would it be fair to say that you abdicated your responsibility by not showing up in Parliament on Friday?
We are not aware of the terms of the agreement.
But then how can you say the terms are not favorable? You don't know the terms.
You know, we love old talk, we love gossip, we love brango, we love all them kind of things in the Caribbean.
If I cannot play music, I don't know how I'm gonna live.
We are borrowing money to pay debt because of corruption, waste, and mismanagement.
That they have difficulty with your leadership. Why then are you contesting the presidency? You've said. And Deacon, another trivia before we get to the segment on health and wellness. Now, you, like myself, we're both from the best parish in Grenada, St. David. I'm going to inject some bias here. But favorite beach, Cabier. I'm sorry, not Cabier. Cabier is in St. Andrews, but La Sagesse, Malmont, Galby, Latant. What beach? David.
I'm going with La Sagesse simply because I spend the most time on La Sagesse. You probably missed out Belial, which probably would be then the second favorite.
Okay, well, I'm from Pomeroy's side, so it's Latant and Cabier for me, and Malmont, and yes, correct. Okay, now let's go on to health and wellness, sir. Now you spoke about decentralizing healthcare in Grenada. Now, to a certain extent, some may say that the healthcare system is already decentralized in terms of the centralized primary healthcare network by way of the health centers that we have across the country. How much more decentralized can one get? And are you speaking here specifically about enhancing the capacity of our decentralized healthcare system? Can you unpack that, please?
Yes, Kelon, you are in fact going in the right direction. We don't just need to have a physical health center. We need to have a functioning, well-resourced, well-equipped, and I would dare say 24 health centers throughout Grenada. And we need to systematically go about this, because the reality is our hospital doesn't have the best reputation, regrettably. The citizens do not have confidence in almost anything to do with the hospital, and it is not because of the healthcare providers or the healthcare practitioners at the hospital. I think we have to understand that the system has regrettably perhaps even collapsed over the last several years, if not decades. And so the starting point as to how we fix that, I think, starts with ensuring that anything that can be dealt with at a community level, at a health center level, should be dealt with there. And it should only really be serious healthcare issues that are taken to our hospital as a starting point. But more fundamentally, as I said, we need to look at a number of issues, even questions like how our healthcare practitioners are remunerated, impacts on their job performance. So for us, I think it is very important for us to understand that we can't just talk about this. We need to, again, I go back to the question of engagement. We need to engage with our healthcare providers or healthcare practitioners, and we need to ask ourselves, why have we gotten to this state? We have a medical school on island. The former NDC administration was pursuing a teaching hospital. There are a number of things that we can do to really improve our healthcare system in Grenada, and some of them are low-hanging fruits. Again, we spend millions of dollars, as I said, sometimes on mind-blowing stuff. And given what COVID-19 has taught us, I would think, and I think if you ask any Grenadian, healthcare, without doubt, is probably the number one priority. Because if you're not here, you have no life. If you're ill, you can't function. And so being able-bodied, being in the right mind, in the right spirit is critical for all of us. And so I think there's no question that we need to pay attention, we need to consult, and we need to find solutions to the healthcare issues that are plaguing us. I mean, the decentralization of the healthcare system is just one possible approach. But I've said this, if we have shortages of nurses, if we have shortages of doctors, for instance, why are we not setting that as a priority and actually saying, in 5 years, we need to produce X number of doctors and ensure that our education system is deliberately targeted to do that? If we need to produce 200 nurses because we are in fact decentralizing and beefing up our health centers to make them into polyclinics, why are we not saying as a nation, then we need to find, train, and create 400 nurses and deliberately go about doing so? And that is what I mean about planning and implementing, setting the goals, setting the vision that you want, and working backwards. If you don't do that, then we'll simply continue as we are going. So we will talk, all of us will talk, all of us will say our healthcare system needs fixing, needs improving. But how are you going to go about doing so if you don't in fact set very specific goals and work towards them? Another aspect of this is not just the nurses and the doctors. We're dealing with modern medicine, we're dealing with technology, we're dealing with equipment and machine. We need people to service those things. Like, how many times do you hear the x-ray machine is broken down so you can't get an x-ray? Why are we not deliberately training persons in those fields? So when we talk about the high rate of unemployment, we are creating the high rate of unemployment because there are obvious needs that we need to be filled in Grenada, and we are not deliberately targeting this and ensuring that our education system produces it. It may be that in instances you may have to send Grenadians overseas for training, or you may have to bring in the trainers to train us. But at a minimum, we ought to be attempting to do so. How many times have we heard that an elevator in the Ministry of in financial complex is not working and we have to fly in a technician from Trinidad? I mean, it's embarrassing, right? The ministerial complex has been there for quite a while now. So that's part of the challenge. You know, healthcare is a complex and comprehensive issue, and it's not just a question of the nurses and the doctors. It's the equipment, the maintenance of it, the servicing of it. You know, and that's where, again, I go back to saying, as a nation, we have to start taking responsibility for our own actions and accept that the country belongs to us, not a politician, not a prime minister, to us. And collectively, those are some of the things we need to demand and insist upon.
Okay, now, and you prefaced my other question, and that has to do with the issue of the retention of nurses and doctors in the public healthcare system in Grenada. Some who remain do so purely out of a patriotic obligation, if we are to be honest.
Yes.
But for the most part, many choose to seek more lucrative opportunities elsewhere.
Yeah.
You know, Grenada has the distinction of producing exports with respect to our health professionals. What are your thoughts on strengthening the capacity of the healthcare systems to allow the retention of our best and brightest? The current administration will say they've been doing that work in improving the country's healthcare infrastructure.
So I would say there are two aspects to this. First of all, if our health system was flourishing, if we had confidence in our hospital, if the health system was decentralized, if our chronic lifestyle diseases were under control, and we had excess nurses, excess doctors, absolutely, because sometimes you're a net exporter of labor. And one would readily say, we don't need to pay attention to retaining our nurses. We don't need to pay attention to retaining our doctors. But that's not the case. And since clearly that is not the case, it means we, in fact, need to put the incentives in place to retain them and to ensure that they remain in Grenada and that we produce more of them. That's one. The second thing is the government has in place for quite a while now an attrition policy where essentially once you reach 60, regardless of your competence, regardless of your experience, that you let go. And I think particularly in the medical field, that is not a wise policy, because we need to train, we need to mentor. And you have to ensure, if there are doctors and nurses who are 60, who have the expertise, the experience, and are willing to still serve, we should ensure that we have a policy in place that allows them to mentor and train some of our younger nurses or younger doctors, so that you don't end up in a situation where potentially all of the experience exits very quickly, and then we have a cadre of young or inexperienced medical practitioners who would not have had the opportunity to benefit from interacting and being helped and being trained or being counseled by some of the. It may very well be too late for that, but those are some of the things we need to look at. So I appreciate that the government might have felt that its wage bill was too high, but I don't think we can necessarily simply value our health by reference to money, right? So those are some of the things that we need to look at. And it's also important for us to educate the population about our health system, about the do's and don'ts, about the challenges that we are all collectively facing. And I go back to the question of it starts with us, because we also need to pay attention to our health. Part of improving our overall health system is that health education, exercise, dieting, the food we eat, those kinds of things need to be reinforced at a very, very early age, and we need to be very systematic about it. And the other things, Kelon, that has unfortunately gone the wrong way in Grenada, the number of community groups, sports clubs, those sorts of things, because you may play sports in school, and then you leave school, and if there aren't community groups and sport groups for you to join, then you stop playing sports and you stop being active, you gain weight. You then, in the busy life of just going to work and taking care of kids, you then develop all kinds of health-related issues. Again, if we continue developing our society in a sustainable and structured manner, so that when you leave school, there are community groups, sporting groups that you and your kids can join, so that you can exercise together, ride a bike together, play netball, football, cricket, and we do that all through our lives. That in and of itself will make our health system and our population healthier. So those are things that we need to encourage, and or community groups or NGOs or sporting groups, the Olympic Association, all of us need to play a part in helping that as well.
Mr. Mitchell, and you make a very good point. I think the elder Mitchell, also a past student of the Presentation College, a senior of yours, he touts the importance of personal responsibility where healthcare is concerned. And yes, while we need to have those structures in place, we also have to have a change of mindset with respect to how we view health, and not only to view health as sickness, but also view it as wellness, right? And view it as ensuring that you take some personal responsibility for your diet and exercise. And that is an important point that I think that is nonpartisan, really. Now, let's get to the issue of drug abuse management and rehabilitation on the island. Grenada has the distinction of having a serious issue of alcohol addiction, with no specialized facilities for rehabilitation. We had the Carlton home that was destroyed after Hurricane Ivan, that was never reconstructed. That was a specialist facility. We no longer have that. Yes. What would specialist rehabilitation for that look like under an NDC administration?
Right. So I'm not sure if you're aware, but in fact, there are a group of private citizens who've in fact been trying to raise funds. I know of, in fact, some of the insurance companies who've been involved in fundraising to, in fact, raise capital to help rebuild the Carlton home. So we need to encourage them to continue doing so. But without doubt, the state itself has a fundamental, I think, responsibility to address that issue by ensuring that an institution exists that can help with drug rehabilitation. It's also critical, I think, for us as a society to accept that substance abuse is real, and I stress abuse here, because no one is going to say that you can't have a drink. But clearly, if we have alcoholism, if we have other forms of drug abuse, those are issues we need to address. And critically, again, it goes back to the question of education. It goes back to the question of lifestyle. It goes back to the question of discipline. And those are some of the issues we need to address. Now, it may be difficult for some people to hear those things, but even the question of how we advertise alcohol, I think is important. Because if we always make it sexy, if we always make it attractive, then it's likely that more and more persons are going to want to do it. But if we don't at the same time teach responsibility, teach the fact that you need to be prudent, teach the fact that you need to use things in moderation, then we're going to end up in a situation where...
Well, no, I would press you there. I mean, you can't tell private enterprise how they should advertise their products.
No,
that would be the pushback. I mean, but
but let me say this, Kellon.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm not saying to legislate. You see, too often we feel you need to mandate things. I'm saying have a conversation. Mm-hmm. We can have a conversation. If you produce alcohol, for instance, if you let me say this. Well, let's put it that, Kellon, you do realize that advertisers of alcohol will tell you, for example, if you're 18, you shouldn't drink. If you're pregnant,
correct. So they do advertise those risk factors.
Right. So that's the point I'm making. I'm making the fact that we need to have conversations we have to have the conversations about it and ask ourselves collectively, how can we be a responsible society? Because I'm sure even the manufacturers of alcohol do not want a Grenada that has a significant percentage of alcoholics. Do not want a Grenada where you have drunk people walking around and causing motor vehicle accidents. They don't want that. And so I'm saying we have a collective responsibility to minimize that. So we have to have the conversations about what are the best tools available to us to minimize that so that we never get to the point where we have significant numbers of our population having to go to Carlton Home or needing a Carlton Home. That's the point I think is more fundamentally important. Yes, you need a Carlton Home, but the less alcoholics you have, right? And you have to understand alcoholism is not just the alcoholism, it's the impact on your society. It contributes to things like domestic violence. How when your children see that, what message are you sending? And it's not just alcohol. Let me not appear as if I'm singling out. I'm saying substance abuse in general is something that we need to openly talk about and ensure that we have less of it, so that there's less need for treatment, less need for rehabilitation. I mean, if you go around urban areas, St. George's, Renville, there are significant numbers or too many people who appear homeless, but to a large extent, what you have is a substance abuse problem, right? And we can't ignore this. In fact, you could, in my view, judge a society by the number of homeless people it has. You can judge a society by the number of persons who are suffering from substance abuse. And there's one other little area, since we talk about health and wellness, I want to talk about mental health, right? It's obvious to spot the physical issues, but we also have to pay attention to our mental health. And I think one way of paying attention to our mental health is, in fact, getting involved in our communities, getting involved in our society, so that collectively we make our society a better place to live in, so that there are less people under stress, less people under anxiety, and therefore less probability that we will suffer from the impacts of mental health. But that is also an area that we need to talk about, and talk about openly, because I think the stigma that traditionally, and the ignorance and the superstition that has been associated with mental health. But I think, thankfully, a lot of the mental health advocates have been doing a good job in terms of letting people know that mental health is an illness just like any other illness, and that we need to treat it and view the persons who are suffering from mental health illnesses with empathy. Because it can happen to any one of us, and it can happen to any one of our family members, and you would not want the stigmatization that comes with that. You want a more empathetic and caring society. So I appreciate your pushback on the question of saying you can't tell people how to advertise their product. But I'm not so sure that I agree with that. You can certainly have a discussion.
Let's just agree to disagree with that aspect of the debate, Mr. Mitchell.
Sure.
And for full disclosure, many people don't know this, but you were a former teacher of mine. But that does not preclude me from asking you the hard questions.
Well, I think you're driven
now.
I think you're driven to ask me even harder questions, perhaps.
perhaps. But let's not go there. And you actually preempted the question on mental health, because that was also on my list to ask. And we actually also received another message here. Someone is suggesting that they do have some rehabilitation services that are provided at the mental hospital in Mount Gay. So perhaps we can do a fact check there. But to the extent that they're providing a full range of services, I don't know what the extent of that is, so I can't necessarily comment on that. But you wanted to add something, sir?
No, I was saying yes, the Mongay Hospital does exist, but I think critically, again, it in my view, it's not something that is given the attention that it deserves, and it's something to look into. But yes, for all of the practitioners and those who help there, that service does exist, and some element of relief is available via that institution.
All right, now we will take a final break, Mr. Mitchell, and we will come back for our final conversational segment here, which would be social issues and the Constitution. Folks, stand by. We'll be right back.
So it's not a legal schooling. I know you're sensitive to people schooling you on the law, but I think I can trump you when it comes to the history of Grenada.
What you're saying is that this resignation was expected? Would it be fair to say that you abdicated your responsibility by not showing up in Parliament on Friday?
We are not aware of the terms of the agreement.
But then how can you say the terms are not favorable? You don't know the terms.
You know, we love old talk, we love gossip, we love brango, we love all them kind of things in the Caribbean.
If I cannot play music, I don't know how I'm gonna live.
We are borrowing money to pay debt because of corruption, waste, and mismanagement.
That they have difficulty with your leadership. Why then are you contesting the presidency? Okay, folks, welcome back for our last segment. As a reminder, please stay with us. We have a post-interview political discussion with Mr. Kem Jones, Mr. Peter Wickham, and Mr. William Joseph. So do stay tuned for that conversation after the interview with Mr. Deacon Mitchell. Now, Mr. Mitchell, on Calistro Faria's The Narrative last week, you intimated that you may serve only one term as Prime Minister. Now, there were some issues with the audio. Now, my question is, would one term be enough to make the grand changes that you desire? You are proposing big systemic change here. One term may not necessarily be enough. And to that point, Grenadians rejected the idea of term limits in the last national referendum. So surely, you can probably stay as long as you want, as perhaps the elder Mitchell. Would you want that?
No. And let me repeat that, no. Nation building is a continuous and relentless pursuit. And all of us need to play our part. And when we've played our part, hand the baton on to the next generation. You are in Washington. It's probably living in the country that most people look at as one of, if not the wealthiest nation to have ever existed in the history of mankind. And it has term limits. The reality is, as human beings, the concentration of power in the hands of a few is a dangerous thing for the society. And it's dangerous for the development of democracy. And it's dangerous, in my view, for ensuring that we continually replenish our democracy. So I have no desire. Let me put it this way, Kelon. What is the point of public office? The point of public office is public service. And when you serve, you move on, right? So I have no desire to hang on or cling on to public office or power in particular. What I did say to Calistro is that I'm committed to at least 10 years of public service. And whether I serve as Prime Minister or not is irrelevant. Once I made the decision to get involved in politics, I recognize that there's a minimum amount of time you need to dedicate to the goals and the policies you are seeking. And I think the important thing is this: if we build our institutions, and if as a society we can agree that there are 5 or 6 common goals that we all desire, regardless of who may be the Prime Minister, his job should be the continuous pursuit of that. So if we accept that as a goal, it is desirable to have a first-class health system. We may sometimes have disagreements as to how we get there, or whether it's via teaching hospital or private hospital. Fine, we can have a debate on that. But I don't think any Grenadian wants to be poor. I don't think any Grenadian wants to be living on the breadline. I don't think any Grenadian wants to say, if I don't get paid this month, then essentially I don't have any reserves of income to pay my bills or to buy food or to pay the bus for my kids to go to school. And I think that is the sort of thing that we need to have the discussions about. And once we agree on those things, then we will obviously find the best route to accomplish them and in a sustainable manner and in the shortest possible time. So for me, it is also important to encourage not just the next generation, but Grenadians who themselves have never gotten involved in public service or public office to do so. Because it is our collective experience, it is our collective wisdom that will give us the best decisions. And after a while, when you serve in any capacity, Kelon, you tend to reach a peak you plateau, and then there's something called the law of diminishing returns. I think most of us were taught the law of diminishing returns in school, and it applies to all of us. It applies to the best of us. And it is important for us to focus on our institutions, because as human beings, the good Lord has placed us here for a certain time, and we will leave. And what we need to do is leave institutions behind that the next generation of Grenadians can take and continuously develop to achieve the goals that we want as a society.
Yeah, you say that, Mr. Mitchell, and that is all well and good esoterically, but and that's your epistemology, that's your worldview.
Right.
But another person, another individual who may assume the reins of leadership of the NDC after you decide to demit office,
right,
may have a different view. Now, I think that I'm saying all of this to say we do not have legal mechanisms in Grenada that limits a politician from serving more than 2 terms as a prime minister. How should we proceed with changing that?
Right. Well, and that takes you to the question of constitution change. And we had a referendum which had so many issues in the referendum that I think at the end of the day, it simply confused the population, and there was just a wholesale rejection of it. You had the Privy Council in there, for example. The question of whether or not you go to the Privy Council, in my view, should have been a single referendum item. The question of whether you have term limits, in my view, should be a single referendum item. So certainly the legal framework has to be changed in order to accomplish that. Another critical issue I think that we need to address as a society, and again, Kilon, it starts with education. It starts with talking. It starts with explaining why it is you are recommending any given thing. So for instance, the fact that we have a Westminster system where the only person who knows when election is going to be is the Prime Minister, in my view, is unhelpful to our democracy, and does not promote the sort of good governance and transparency you want. So certainly I favor a situation where the election date is fixed and everybody knows this is the election date. For that to happen, you need a legislative framework for this to take place. As it's taken as a single item, if an NDC government favors that position, if collectively after our internal caucusing we favor that position, our job then is to go to the people and have that discussion, not force it upon them, not mandate it, explain to them, these are the pros and cons of us having a fixed election date, as opposed to the current system where the Prime Minister, essentially, whenever it suits him, he calls an election. And then let the people decide. If the people say we are happy with the existing Westminster system and we want to continue with it, that's the collective wisdom of the people, and then you abide by it. That's what democracy is. If, however, having listened to you, they accept that it's an improvement on a democracy, then they will vote in favor of saying, put the legislative framework in place that says our elections are called at a fixed time. And the same will happen when it comes to the question of fixed term limits. But it is important that we don't confuse people and throw too many things at them. And critically,
but I would push back there. There was an educational program under the Constitutional Reform Advisory Council with respect to the last referendum.
Yeah,
I mean, and these bills were separate, so I don't know how you're saying that those were confusing.
No, the referendum, you had multiple questions, Kelon, that you had to decide all upon on the same day. That's one. And I was smiling when you said there was an education attempt. That's what I would call it, an education attempt. It was woefully inadequate. And that's the point I'm making about going to our communities. You know, yes, there's social media, and that's one platform. But we are dealing with human beings. The same way we pull out our election machinery and we find our citizens in every nook and cranny to campaign to them about putting us in power. When it comes to matters of statehood, not politics, statehood, when it comes to matters that will improve our well-being and our lives, and we can just take the vaccination, do we do that? Do we put the effort and the resources? Do we get our MPs or village influencers or community influencers or spiritual leaders to go? And it's important to have the discussion, not to try and force something down someone's throat. It's about education. It's about talking why we may think this may be good or not. And ultimately,
so are you suggesting that the referendum was forced? I mean, at the end of the day,
I'm not saying. Well, the referendum happened. Somebody had to make the decision that we're having a referendum, and that's the state, the government. You have to decide I'm having a referendum. You set the date for the referendum, and then you may take it that way, or you could have chosen not to have a referendum. So somebody made a decision that we were having a referendum on these issues. And I'm saying, even that question, what informed that question? What informed that question? What was the level of turnout, for example, at the referendum? So I'm just saying this to say, part of leadership is educating, because sometimes that's what you have to lead. If you genuinely and earnestly believe that which you're advocating for is in the best interest of the citizens, then it's your job to tell them that. But I'm saying the manner in which you communicate that, the how, the when, the where, is just as important. And ultimately, if the people reject it, then of course you have to move on. So I'm not saying here to say to you that I will be advocating that immediately that you go on about trying to change the constitution. Whether or not you get to that point, again, will come from your interaction and engagement with people.
But you keep saying that. But what is your position, though? Do you believe that elements of the Constitution needs to be changed?
I just told you two of them. I just said to you, fixed term limits, in my view, is something that is desirable. And I just told you having a fixed date for elections is something that is desirable.
What else? What else?
Well, I mean, I will tell you this, for example, I'm in favor of local government for my dear brothers and sisters in Piti Martin and Carriacou in particular. That is something that I think we need to seriously address. I'm certainly in favor of ensuring that we put a legislative framework in place that allows parliamentarians who have been elected by the people to be provided with one, fixed parliamentary offices, permanent staff, and sufficient budgetary allocations to allow them to do work in the community and to represent people, so that people can adequately judge them as to whether or not they have properly represented them. Again, we have a situation where everything is centralized, and we end up in a situation where everybody wants to be a cabinet minister because they feel if you're not a cabinet minister, you will not be in a position to do anything in your community or do anything for your constituents who've appointed it. And we need to reverse that situation. You cannot have, and it literally becomes dictatorship of the prime minister because you serve at his pleasure in cabinet. And if you have no resources to do any work whatsoever in your constituency, then the question is, who are you representing? You have no resources, so the entire thing is almost farcical, right? And we end up in a situation where you literally hoping to become a cabinet minister and hope that somehow you have resources at your disposal that you can perhaps channel into your community. So those are some of the things that we need to talk about. And I'm saying talk about, Kellon, because these may be my views, but others may have other ways of addressing it. And we need to be able to listen, hear all of this, engage in the community, and then see what's the best fit.
Okay, let us quickly move on because we have to get to the next segment, Mr. Mitchell, and thank you for your indulgence. Speaking of referendum, Barbados is moving towards Republican status.
Yes.
The country is also eliminating the Queen as its head of state.
Yes.
Hooray to Barbados for doing that. I don't think the Queen should be the head of state of any formerly colonized country in the Caribbean. Yes. Something a political conservative Grenada again failed to do in the last referendum.
Yes.
Do you believe that Grenada should proceed towards Republican status? Or do you believe we should maintain the status quo?
So you're asking me what I believe, yes? So I want to make it clear.
That's your belief, yes.
That's
I
my
want to
belief,
hear, yes.
I don't believe we should maintain the Queen as our head of state. Whether we have a government that can be called Republican status is another question. I think there are significant parts of our government that exists for the sake of existing and doesn't actually play any meaningful role in improving the lives of our communities, and some of it are frankly outdated and expensive to maintain. I recall once attending a lecture by former Barbadian Prime Minister Owen Arthur, and he made reference to the fact that we don't seem to pay attention that the cost of the state is very expensive. The trappings of government is very expensive, and we really should ensure that our government is lean, mean, efficient, and serves the people, so that a lot of the money we spent on propping up the trappings of statehood should go towards educating our people, should go towards paying our principals, should go towards paying our nurses. And I say this to say that that's one of the issues we need to look at in terms of the overall improvement of the civilization of our civilizations. So merely replacing the Queen with a local head of state who's ceremonial, and ceremonial essentially means you're not doing anything. And they have the state pay for it, I think is something that should also be examined. So a true Republican state, for example, like the US, doesn't have a ceremonial head of state. It has one head of state. And in my view, that ideally it should be the system if you want to be a Republican system, because the head of state should be someone elected by the people. The sovereign should be someone that the people have elected after having had the opportunity to hear or see or get to know him or her. And to me, that really is who should be leading the country. So I'm telling you this in terms of my belief. I think ceremonial heads of state are a waste of state resources, and those resources should be better placed in the communities, in improving our livelihood.
But that would require, Mr. Mitchell, re-engineering and rethinking about the entire system in which we now operate, which is the Westminster system of democracy. But of course, this is not a law, constitutional law. We'll quickly move on to the topic of reparations. You spoke about your love for history and the influence that our history teacher, Ali Gill, had on your sense of respect for culture.
Yes.
Ali Gill currently heads the Reparations Commission in Grenada.
Yes.
What is your position on the notion of reparations for formerly colonized countries like Grenada?
In absolute support of it.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think it should be pursued, and I think it should be pursued. And to quote Professor Hilary Beckles, our foreparents didn't give up on their right to be treated as human beings, on their right to be free, on their right to live in a dignified manner. And we should never give up on the right of seeking reparations for them and for future generations.
Mm-hmm. 3 quick final questions. Firstly, the idea of cannabis reform in Grenada is painstakingly slow as compared to the other islands in the English-speaking Caribbean. However, I'm sure that we can predict that will become a hot-button issue in the next elections, based on, of course, the CARICOM Commission on cannabis that was released many years ago. Now, since the current administration has been also making moves to implement some of these recommendations, or at least there have been talk about doing that, making that promise. Now, that's not necessarily a novel idea. No. How would NDC's cannabis reform proposals look different from what the current incumbent of Dr. Mitchell is proposing?
Well, let me say this. I mean, the CARICOM report was tabled. I think for us, crucially, we have to view, and we use the word cannabis, but I'd probably say hemp. I think we need to view the hemp industry.
Why don't you say cannabis or weed or marijuana?
Because historically,
why are you being politically correct about that?
No, it's not, because you have to understand language and the emotive nature of it. Historically, cannabis or weed has been associated purely with the entertainment or getting high aspect of marijuana use, or for that matter, marijuana abuse, and the criminality or non-criminality of smoking. Let's face it. I'm saying when we talk about the hemp industry here now, we are talking about an economic plant that has a varied use. And then we are talking essentially about medical marijuana and exploiting that from an economic point of view. And so critically, that is what the focus has to be on. The focus has to be on how do we exploit the plant from a medical and from an economic point of view. And I think that is what the focus has to be on. And again, there are examples of countries that have already forged ahead, and we can look at what they're doing. We can learn from their experiences and craft the appropriate policy position, the appropriate activities from an economic perspective that will actually benefit Grenada.
All right. So, are you on the side of decriminalization or full legalization?
I'm on the side of
full legalization.
Because it's let me put it this way. I certainly support that someone should not be locked up for recreational use of marijuana. Mm-hmm. But we also have to recognize that there's an upside and a downside to everything. And we were just talking about substance abuse and alcohol abuse and so on. And we also have to pay particular attention to that. So what you don't want is a situation where you end up with significant abuse of the use of recreational marijuana. So I don't think recreational use should be criminalized. But in my view, again, it should be controlled. It should be regulated, because similarly, we don't sell alcohol to 18-year-olds, to persons who are under 18-year-olds. So again, similarly, I will not be advocating for the use of marijuana for persons who don't have the ability legally, and perhaps from a maturity point of view, to consent.
But there are prohibitions with respect to the age of consent with alcohol as well. I mean, so
that's what I'm saying. So when I say decriminalize it, I'm saying decriminalize it as in it's no longer a criminal offense to use marijuana recreationally, but you have to regulate the use of it notwithstanding, right? Okay. And the regulating the use of it notwithstanding is not just the use of it. You have to regulate it from a health standard point of view, right? Because the same way in which buying moonshine is a risk, a health risk, not just a criminal or legal or illegal activity. If you drink alcohol that's not produced properly or in a safe environment, you face a health risk. And so similarly, when it comes to marijuana use, if we are not regulating it from a health perspective, then you also face the risk that someone using it may in fact suffer unintended health consequences other than the question of whether you get high or not. And so I'm saying when I talk about regulation, I'm talking about regulation in a wholesale manner.
Okay, that is an interesting response. Responded there. Okay, now there is a grave issue of child sexual assault in Grenada that appears to be endemic in the population. Are the current sentencing guidelines, Mr. Mitchell, a sufficient deterrent to prevent this terrible epidemic that's ravaging vulnerable children in the country?
I can't answer and tell you yes or no the sentencing guidelines are sufficient. The question of sentencing guidelines are essentially matters for the lawmakers and crucially the judges, the judiciary, because ultimately we have separation of power. That's the basis of the Westminster model. And the judges ultimately are the ones who sentence persons who are offenders. But without question, this is a scourge on our society. And we need to tackle it from, again, I kept saying the ground up, because the question is, why is it happening? And how can we go about educating particularly our abusers to recognize that this is not acceptable behavior? It's dehumanizing, it's barbaric, it's animalistic. And therefore, we have to spend a lot of time looking at our communities, looking at our homes, and ask ourselves what is happening within our society that is creating these monsters, right? And that requires long and deep reflection and acceptance about some of the cultural practices that we have either swept under the carpet or we pretend doesn't exist. And if we don't shine a light on it and speak about it and tackle it, then no amount of sentencing guidelines is going to work, because it's too late. It is too late by then, because you would have lost another child. Someone else would have been abused, and potentially you may very well in doing so have created another abuser, because what is done to people, they tend to replicate and do onto others. So this is a very sensitive and painful subject. For all of the persons who've ever had to experience any form of child or sexual abuse, my deep empathy to them. But as a society, we owe it to them to ensure that less and less of this happens, and that ultimately we aim to eradicate it. Now that comes with education, it comes with proper socialization, it comes with addressing our taboos, it comes with addressing poverty. It comes with addressing poverty, because let's not ignore that. Many times, poverty drives this sort of behavior, and people are taking advantage of purely for economic means. So those are some of the issues we need, and it cannot be a single approach. It cannot just be the social workers. It has to be parents, the churches, our teachers, people in our community looking out for our children. Because hurting a child, it's incomprehensible to me how an adult hurts a child. But it happens, and it happens all too often. And so it's something that we need to collectively engage and address, and not just leave it up to our social workers, right? And we're too small of a village for this to continue to be happening.
Yeah. And finally, Mr. Mitchell, this is a question about the public library. This has been a thorn in my side as an academician, as an educator, as someone who used the resources of the Grenada Public Library on the Carenage in St. George's. It is very sad to see the state of the public library. Now, I know that you are an avid contributor to one of the one of the private community libraries in Grenada. What are your thoughts on just ensuring that we have not only the public library, but we have a system of public libraries across Grenada? You've spoken a lot today about education, and sometimes it really pains my heart to see kids just hanging out on the side of the street after school, at the bus terminal and other places, when in fact they could actually go to the library and make productive use of that time.
It's depressing, it's painful, it's almost tearful that we have not seen it fit to reopen our library. And this is something that, frankly, the National Democratic Congress is going to be advocating for, whether or not we're in power. This is something that we intend to actively pursue. This is something we intend to engage our community in communities, because we need libraries throughout the length and breadth of Grenada. We intend to drum up support. We intend to speak to everyone we can within and outside of Grenada to get our libraries open, because it's not just the books anymore. I mean, just the historic. I mean, just look at the building and its history, its culture, its role in the architecture of St. George's. It's Kelon, honestly, it's when I say it's depressing, I mean that. It is shocking as a nation that we don't have a national library, because it tells you something about us. It suggests that learning isn't important. It suggests that education isn't important. It suggests that enhancement isn't important. It suggests our history and our culture. Where is our national archives? The Governor General's residence has not been rebuilt. Who has the national archives? Do we even know where it is? So if you don't value your history, if you don't value your culture, if you don't value learning, it means you don't value life. It means you don't value your society. You don't value your civilization. And so it really is a damning indictment on us that we have not agitated, advocated, marched, petitioned to insist that the National Library is reopened. And I will say this to say to you, whether I'm involved in politics or not, this is something that I intend to pursue. It's something I intend to encourage others to get involved in. And as citizens, I'm satisfied that if we do the right thing, we will get the state to do the right thing.
Well, I do know that citizen Susan Maines has actually embarked upon a petition drive, a public education campaign, if you will, to pressure a central government, and in particular also the Member of Parliament for the town of St. George, Mr. Peter David, a former executive member of the NDC, of course, to really do something about that facility, because it's immoral. In my view. Now, Mr. Mitchell, I would give you a chance for some closing comments. We went beyond the allotted time, but I do thank you for indulging with us today.
Sure.
Over to
you.
Well,
then I should start by apologizing to your coming guests for cutting into their time. But Kelon, it's been an absolute pleasure to have the discourse with you. I look forward to more of this. I want to say thank you to your listeners and viewers who heard me today. As I said, I got involved in politics because we need to raise the nature of our discourse. We need to talk about matters that are important. We need to be positive and constructive in our comments and in our criticism, so that we find solutions to our collective problems. And that is why I got involved. That is why I hope to encourage others to get involved. Because if I've gotten involved, there's no reason why you can't get involved, so that we collectively improve our small islands of Petit Martinique, Carriacou, and Grenada. So thank you again. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely, Mr. Mitchell, a past student of the Presentation College. I was holding that until the end, but it's on a personal note. It is good to see our brothers from the Hill trying to make a difference and serving their communities in Grenada and around the world. So thank you again, Mr. Mitchell.
Thank you, Kelon, and have a great Sunday evening.
Okay. All right, folks, that was Mr. Deacon Mitchell, the newly minted and newly elected political leader of the National Democratic Congress. Of course, there were some other issues that we needed to address with Mr. Mitchell, but that did not give us enough time to ventilate those other pressing issues that we had on our programmatic agenda. But we want to take a quick break and come back with the panel segment of the week. Mr. Peter Wickham is waiting in the wind. Peter, I know that you did say you have to go, but I will thank you for your indulgence. Mr. Kem Jones and Mr. William Joseph. So stay with us, folks. We will take a break and come right back.
Since losing that seat, what have you been up to? Now, Mr. Attorney General, this particular provision sounds...
A pleasant, I'm saying a pleasant good morning, but welcome back, folks. And at this time, I'm joined by Mr. Peter Wickham of the pollster of the Cadres, a political polling firm, as well as Mr. Kem Jones. Mr. William Joseph, please turn your camera on. Are you hiding from Hamlet, sir? Please come on the Bob Report. I'm not going to abuse you on this platform. But Peter, I want to start with you quickly. Now, in previous years, you've given several prescriptive recommendations to the National Democratic Congress with respect to what their particular direction should be. You've also, in your data with respect to previous polling, you spoke about voters in Grenada who did not necessarily vote. As a matter of fact, I believe in the last election, over 20,000 people did not vote. And that could have been for a number of factors, but clearly it points to disaffection. Looking at the new look NDC, would you say that the next general elections in Grenada would be much more competitive as what we have witnessed in the past?
Yeah, no, it was interesting to listen to the new leader, and certainly I congratulate him on coming forward. And I think one of the things that struck me about his presentation is that he seems to want to turn over a new leaf. You know, I've been very critical of the fact that the NDC has been focused almost exclusively on attacking Keith Mitchell. And the presumption is that, you know, attacking Keith Mitchell and saying bad things about him would have been the route to victory. In my opinion, that has turned off a lot of people, and it may very well have contributed to the fact that many people don't participate because they don't really see anything to vote for. So the extent to which he is coming in and has been spending a lot of time not attacking Dr. Mitchell, but certainly speaking to what he wants to see change, I think is a step in the right direction.
But certainly there is also merit to attack the incumbent. I mean, that is what politicians do. This is not something that's a novel idea, is it?
No, but if you are going to attack Dr. Mitchell, and if you look at the attacks on Dr. Mitchell, they've been consistent. I mean, it's the same thing, you know, the same corruption allegation, the same scandalous allegations that have been made. And if you're going to attack a person on that basis, and you're going to do it 3 times without success, then, you know, I think that's a garden variety definition of lunacy. If you repeat the same mistake over and over again and the outcome is the same, and in the case of the NDC, the outcome has been devastating because you have been beaten in the worst way possible 3 times, whether you be in government or opposition. And I think that the fact that if your strategy to defend yourself is to say that this individual is so bad, but yet still people give him all the seats, then clearly you're on the wrong path. So there's nothing wrong with attacking a government, but I think the basis of the attack does leave some questions as to whether or not it was in the right direction.
Okay, now let me bring in Kem Jones. Kem Jones, some are calling you a kingmaker, if you will. You've actually openly campaigned for Mr. Deacon Mitchell to serve in his current role as political leader of the National Democratic Congress. What was happening on the ground in Grenada that gave you a sense that the NDC really needed to take a new direction? Because you were very critical. Yeah, you're not shy about your critique of the NDC.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Kellon, for having me on the program. I want to start off by saying I am on the ground, so to speak, listening to ordinary people. And that's why we started the Youth for Change movement, going and listen to people having that kind of engagement. And clear-cut, people are saying they want change, they want newness, they want something fresh. They want somebody who is progressive in their thinking. In other words, they want to move to a different direction. Deacon was that beacon of hope for many people. Everywhere you go, the buzz is very clear. People want that kind of freshness. And I think people have found it in Deacon Mitchell. You see, some people underestimate what we were actually doing. When I started calling for reform over and over again, realizing that it was not happening quick enough, I decided to go openly on the 2 shows that I do and say it as is, because people know me to be that kind of uncut, unfiltered, sometimes controversial, but straight in the face. Everybody would not like you, but the strategy has worked because the Grenadian people were actually calling for that kind of change, that kind of new look. And I want to congratulate Deacon Mitchell for stepping forward, because it's not easy, you know, Kellon, to come forward and be the leader of the NDC or any political party in Grenada, because you know when good people come forward, they would go after them no matter what, to character assassinate them, to destroy them. And I've given that commitment. I've stated very clearly, I will not sit idly by and allow the people who are accustomed to destroying good people to destroy Deacon Mitchell, because I believe he's just what Grenada needs at this point in time. And look, I'm happy, I'm excited. The reform has started and still a lot to be had, a lot to be done in going forward. I'm excited.
Now, I suspect, Kem, if Deacon were to go off the rails a little bit, that you would also be holding him accountable as you've had other members of the party? And are you now going to submit your application for full official membership into the NDC? Are we going to be seeing a return of the yellow T-shirt on your various platforms?
Well, who tell you I'm not a member of the NDC?
Well, I mean, this is breaking news to us. I didn't know that. I always felt as if you were an independent arbiter, kingmaker from the outside. So you're breaking news to us today.
Right. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not admitting that. I'm just kidding. The lighter side of things. You see, for me, I believe that Deacon will transform this country. And I can tell you straight off the bat, this platform here, he can get it anytime to use, meaning the two programs that I do, the People's Program. In other words, you would not find Kem Jones out there criticizing this individual. I will pick up the phone, I will call him, I will say, hey, Deacon, boy, X, Y, and Z is the case. But you would not find that in going forward. It's in other words, that is what people want, the reform process. It is here. I might be very frank on issues, and I will continue to be. So, for example, Deacon just spoke a while ago on the issue of cannabis. We differ. We are different in our position, right? I am for legalization, full legalization of cannabis, of marijuana. He's for decriminalizing it and regulating it and so on. And I am for regulating, I am for expunging of the criminal records of people, who have been wrongfully arrested and charged and so on. I am for that. Clean the records of young people so they can travel and they can bloom and, get employment and opportunities. I'm also for regulating it. I'm also for a formal apology to be given to the Rastafarian community for the wrongs that they have committed against them, for the use of this herb. It's not, so we may differ on certain things. We may have different, ideas on certain things, but we're gonna sit and see how we can come to some place where we can agree, right? And that's the approach in going forward. I think Grenada needed a person like this young man, and I will stand in the gap to defend him. I believe he's forward-thinking, progressive. That's what we want, and it's a different approach. In going forward, you can expect that, a totally different approach in going forward. I was very
yes, go ahead.
There, and we see the reform taking place, and it was purposefully done from my end for that reform to take place, and that's what I will be.
When you say it was purposefully done, expand on that, please.
No, meaning that Kem Jones out there, because I have been reaching out. The mere fact that I come forward publicly and say, look, people are asking for the change, people are asking for the reform. Certain people need to step back, certain people need to step forward. In other words, I was very public on this. Some people criticize me.
That you were, and I'm sorry to cut you, but let's unpack this a bit. Let's assume that the election of the NDC went another way. What would the fortunes be for the NDC? You just heard the pollster here relative to what the NDC could be doing, having sort of a forward-thinking approach to the politics. Now, let's say that the election went another way.
What for?
For the convention? How would you have responded to that?
No, my position was very clear. I stated very clearly that the Grenadian people wanted Deacon Mitchell. They've stated so over and over and over again. I am on the ground. Yes, Peter Wickham is out there. He will do his scientific poll and so on. But I'm on the ground. I get the information firsthand from people, and they wanted Deacon Mitchell. And I stated on the program that is Deacon Mitchell or no way, because you're not going to go in a ship that you already know going to crash, right? So it was very clear cut on my program that I explained those things. And I got Peter Wickham spoke about not criticizing or not speaking about Keith Mitchell and certain issues and so on. We are not in the age of briefcase, We are talking about real issues. Dr. Keith Mitchell, the Prime Minister of this country, promised Grenadians oil and gas. Where is the oil and gas? We're going to criticize him on that. That's a solemn promise he made to the Grenadian people. The issue of lowering the high cost of electricity. Once they take control of Grenlec, the price of electricity will go down. We have the man on record promising that. Right now, Grenadians are experiencing the highest cost of electricity that we have ever seen in how much decades, right? So we're going to continue to criticize, particularly on my program and other platforms, Keith Mitchell on substance, on issues. When we talk about high electricity costs, high cost of gasoline and diesel in the country, high water rate, high food prices, high unemployment, high poverty rate, high corruption within government, cell phone gate that would come to mind, high victimization of public officers, no pension, no gratuity, the destruction of the rural economy, lack of disposable income for our people, a broken healthcare system, a broken education system. We can go on and on. In other words, what we have been doing for the many years, we have been talking to the issues, but we must also highlight to people who is actually responsible for all that I mentioned there. And Keith Mitchell has a great part to play in this, and that is the direction that we have been going. Not no briefcase talk and all this stupidness. We are more focused.
So Peter, you heard that what Ken said. He said that the messaging seems to be evolving in the way that they approach the issues that are affecting the country. Your thoughts?
Yeah, no, and I'm happy to engage you because I only have 3 minutes remaining, and I want to say a couple of things. So yeah, no, I mean that's fine. You know, the fact that they're not going in the direction of the briefcase and they're challenging on issues. But look, there are a couple other things which came up in the conversation. For example, he started to speak to concerns he had about constitutional direction in Grenada. And I was somewhat disappointed in the way that he treated to the issues, because effectively what he is saying is that a lot of the changes which were proposed and that were in the referendum, he actually supports. So he supports term limits. I think they were proposing 3 terms. He supports 2, fine. But the point is that he supports term limits. But that failed. And I think that a big part of the reason it failed, it failed because the NDC did not get behind it and support it. And then there were several other practical changes that were in there the second time around. He said it was a question of one question. You challenged him on it. I mean, but he suggested that it was a single issue referendum that was needed, when for all intents and purposes Grenada had both. You had a multiple issue single question, and then you had a single issue, several questions on single issues, and people had the opportunity to vote for and against, and Grenadians rejected all of them with the support of the NDC, which is the important point. So hold on a second,
Go ahead, Peter.
Hold on a second. And I'm saying that if we are going to agree that there's fundamental change that needs to be made in Grenada, and I'm supporting him on that entirely, he also has to accept that the NDC will have some of the same challenges making those changes. Because when you get to a stage where you support the idea that there should be a leader of the opposition created in situations where you don't have, which is directly beneficial to the NDC, and the NDC campaigns against it, then you have to acknowledge the fact that, you know, as an NDC, you have also fallen short of the glory. And then the final thing about the Republic, I mean, and I was completely at sea there, because I think that he is completely at sea, because he's saying, I support a Republic, but I don't support a Republic. And I'm trying to understand, if you do not believe that the Queen should be head of state of Grenada, then what exactly are you proposing as an alternative? Because it's one or the other. He said he supports an American-style republic, which is fine, but there's a Trinidad and Tobago Republic, there's a Dominican Republic, there's a republic in Guyana. There are several other republics that do not rise to the level of the American system and the American option. That could be an option for Grenada, because you appreciate that when you start talking about moving in the direction of the American system, it's a kind of fundamental change that if Grenada cannot agree to impose a term limit on the leader, if Grenada cannot agree to change the name of Grenada from Grenada to Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Martinique, if Grenada cannot agree to some of the simple changes that were in there, how is Grenada going to agree to an American-style republic? And I think that what you have basically seen in the case of Barbados is a simple situation where government is saying, look, people will accept that we don't want the Queen as the head of state. Let's move in that direction while discussing other alternatives. He's saying, I don't believe the Queen should be head of state of Grenada, but he's saying that he doesn't support the Republic. And I think that it was important for him to be asked, if you do not believe that Grenada should have the Queen as your head of state, then what exactly as an alternative you're proposing? Because in life, there's only one or the other. You're either constitutional monarchy or you're a republic of some sort. And I think that with his enormous legal and constitutional intelligence, that's something that he can't afford to be at sea on an issue like that. So I think that the guy he's talking a good talk. When he has to walk it, he's going to have some challenges. And I can certainly say that I wish him well, because certainly he seems to be moving in a direction that is completely different to the Nazim Burkes and the Tillman Thomases. And I think that Grenada will respond well to that in the final analysis. But I'm going to have to run now, though.
I think Grenada would respond well to that in the final analysis. Thank you there, Peter, for that apt thesis. Cam, really quickly, Peter, thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Go ahead.
In fact, I'm supposed to start my program at 1.
Yes, so you have to go as well. So I apologize for that. But I would hang here with my sparring partner, William Joseph, and Kem Jones and Peter Wickham. Thank you all for appearing on the Bob Report. Thanks for having an intelligent discourse, gentlemen. Thank you again. Okay, William, welcome.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Yes, and you've been waiting in the wind here. And now, the last time you were on the report, you served us a three-course meal, if you will. I'm sure that you after today's buffet, you are full. You are filled with pride at what what unfolded on the Bob Report today. Let's hear your thoughts about my conversation with Mr. Deacon Mitchell, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, I think a marker has been laid. Okay, and I gauge it on three grounds. One is the breadth of his knowledge of public affairs. I didn't hear a typical lawyer talking there. I heard something beyond that, well beyond that, right? So there's his ability to discuss a range of issues in public affairs is something that impressed me. And I want to come back to that shortly. The other thing I think is that I think he achieved the emotional connection that's needed. I think people look him in the eyes because he looks us in the eye, and people see a sincerity and a clarity, and I think unpretentious. So I think that emotional battle, if you will, I think he is well on the way towards winning that. And the other point I would make is that I think you put these things together. You see, a lot of us in the voting population want to feel a level of comfort and confidence, whichever class it is, whether we are poor, whether we are working class, middle class, or upper class. And I think that the message that he delivered is going to go a long way. It's early days. As Peter said, he's going to have to walk the talk. But one senses a degree of commitment and sincerity in what he's saying, and that he has spent some time, not just the eve of the NDC elections. This man appears to have spent a number of years paying attention to the core issues in public affairs. So yes, he might not have been as articulate on the question of constitutional reform and so on, but that's going to be fixed. And the last thing I would say is this, and I'm making a connection now with this question of experience, because it keeps coming up. Now, Deacon Mitchell belongs to a segment of the population that is driving the Grenadian economy. 40% of our population consists of people between 25 and 54. They are the ones who are running the country, really. So he's right in the middle of that. So he's not a stranger to the development issues in Grenada. It is very, very heartwarming to hear him talk about process and then his approach in terms of having or accessing competence, teams of people who can come to the table with sound options and advice and so on, that he as Prime Minister, hopefully in his mind, would have to reckon with. So I think we are getting the shape of something that is encouraging for a lot of Grenadians, and Sunday euphoria is still on the rise. All right, that is the emotional thing, and so on. People have welcomed the appointment, but now we are getting some substance out of him, as you have drilled him today. And I think, by all accounts, or by any fair account, I think he has done very, very, very well.
Yes, and now the NDC has been beleaguered by palace intrigue, right? There still appears to be some internal tensions, again, to the extent that these tensions are widespread, and to the extent that these tensions are entrenched into the body politic of the NDC. That is something I don't know. I'm not on the ground in Grenada, so I can't really speak to that, but probably you can. How does Deacon Mitchell really ensure that the curse of that past does not continue into the future of the party?
Yeah, I think there's an urgency. There's an urgency for him to machine a new brand. The NDC has to offer the Grenadian public a new brand of politics, a new brand of development thinking, and I think he touched on these things. Branding is crucial in the present context. The ruling party is essentially a provider brand, the hand of supply. And that's why they are so popular and strong among the poor people, especially, and with appeal into the working and middle classes. Right? A provider brand. The NDC is going to have to come to us with a branding that makes sense, that connects with people emotionally and in terms of their welfare, prosperity, the prospects of that, because there are certain stigmas that have been associated with the NDC regarding the question of operating the economy. So there have been some issues there, and I am encouraged with respect to this. People have raised.
William, and you talk about perceptions, but there are also perceptions with respect to the thesis that the National Democratic Congress is an elitist political organization, right? And so how do you connect with the working class, especially in an environment where you have someone like a Dr. Keith Mitchell, who has been able to connect with the working class very well? I mean, his rhetoric tends to be very colloquial, right. There is a grounded approach to how he speaks to certain people, and some may say that cost certain people with respect to prospects for upward social mobility and things like that. But that is something that he's able to do well. How does NDC rid itself of that perception that it's anti that idea of?
Well, you see, so it's tied up in the notion of the rebranding that I suggested that needs to be done, right? There is something for the persona and voice and presence and so on that people identify with. It's part of the cultural setup of our politics, and it's very, very important. So, but I think there's an opportunity for the NDC of today to establish itself as a very different political organization than what we've had for a long time. You see, so the stigma issues, right, regarding the economy, the stigma issue regarding division, the stigma issue regarding, contention inside there, they're going to have to put these things to bed. Now, poor people understand very, very well this whole question of a provider. They've been comfortable with that since the estate era. And that's why they're so loyal. They were loyal to the estate owners back then too. So we bred that. The working class Grenadian, we look at the characteristics, drill down there. First of all, the education level is a lot higher among the working class. So that says that they would be concerned about information. Information. They want information. They would also be concerned about a relationship, trusting relationships. And I think the big ticket issue for working people would be the programs that the NDC comes to the table with that lifts the stake of the working people in Grenada, whether it is ownership, or whether it is education, what have you. But there must be very discrete programs to lift the thing. So when we're talking about, for example, big money in the politics and big business supporting people and so on, we need to balance that thing. because big business has been supporting political party X in Grenada for as long as it has existed. And they have run the country. People could say they have pursued policies in support of this and support of that. So similarly, one might expect that if big business were to support the NDC in this period, there might be issues on which the organization as government might in fact seek to balance considerations there regarding policy. But on the other side is this: poor people, with every respect I say this, poor people can't develop country. We need people with resources, people with money to make it happen. And so that is the importance and significance of business people. If that is the case, I'm hearing that, but if that were to be the case, of business people aligning themselves by way of support to the NDC for the first time in many, many, many years.
But William, the new National Party has been historically going back to the Grenada National Movement, the GNP, not the GNM, the GNP, right? They've always historically been tied to big business. How then are you suggesting that there is going to be a historic alignment away from that from the NNP to the NDCs? Is that what you're seeing on the ground?
No, I'm saying there is some word. I wouldn't say evidence because I'm not in the middle of things. There is some word that some elements of the business community, both local and foreign, might be willing to align themselves with the NDC. And that's why in certain quarters, people have been asking questions about big money and doing the bidding of big money. That's where it's coming from. And an expectation.
But I think it's a fair narrative. I mean, you have to appreciate the current context of the Grenadian business community. We cannot only view the Grenadian business community as a chamber of commerce and these homegrown indigenous entities that we have. We now have an influx of capital from Grenadian expatriates who are returning to Grenada, but we also have the citizenship by investment class, right? And that is a question that I didn't get to ask Deacon, right? So I think it really comes down to looking at business not only as the homegrown business community, but other elements of the business community that are also coming into play. And CBI investors are investing a lot in Grenada. They might have interest there as well.
But of course, and it is fair and legitimate that they have interests. And the role of government then, in my view, ought to be to balance these interests such that business, broadly defined as you have just done so, and other groups in the society both benefit. In other words, we must not impoverish people while other people get everything that they need. I'm saying that some balance has to be achieved in the process, so that to me there is no sin or crime involved in this question of big business supporting and big business having some influence on policy. That goes with the territory, right? It would not be the first time, it would not be the last time. But I think the important thing would be the extent to which an NDC regime under Deacon Mitchell is able to balance those interests so that all the sides, as many of them as possible, feel that, listen, I'm getting a fair shake here, right? Poor people feel that they are moving up. And let me make a point about this thing with poor people. You see, we are talking about empowerment. Empowerment occurs where education, and education now is an expensive resource. It has to be paid for. Where education and money, financial resources meet. And they meet in a way that enable people who were not doing well to acquire new skills and so on, so that they could produce goods and services and sell those goods and services. In other words, they now begin to have a production mandates from which they generate incomes to help them, and that would lift them up gradually out of one class into another. So we need it. We need, and we should not be fearful about this question about foreign investment and so on. Look. You asked him a question about regarding the revenue status of the country. No, when you raise the revenue question, you have to put the expenditure thing priorities on the side of that. But if you stick to the revenue issue, you begin by appreciating that we're a society that is demanding of our government goods and services that the Treasury can't pay for. The Treasury cannot pay for it. What we as citizens are demanding. Now, there is a lot of issues regarding how we prioritize the spending of what we have. That's a fair issue. But I'm making the point that the revenue side has to be carefully, very, very carefully addressed. The whole question of the resettlement of the economy now after COVID, you raised the question. And I like the response that you got in the context of a starting point with the National Sustainable Development proposals. These are ideas, proposals. And if anybody has taken the time to look there, I'm sure they're going to find proposals in there that they would be willing to support. It's not perfect, but it's positive. And I think he's very correct to say, let us go there, take this thing into our hands and our minds, look to see how we could put it to work, bring alongside some of those ideas some new thinking. Because why? The entire platform, you're talking about the resettlement of the economy, we have to resettle it to satisfy three interests, really. So there is business, there's the working class stroke middle class, and there's the poor, there are poor people. And so that entire movement has to lift all three.
A rising tide that lifts all boats, yes?
That's the point. That's the point.
But Willie, yes, go ahead. We have to take a quick break, though. We did not take our first segment break. And I have a clip here with George Brizan. And, you raise a question about age and experience, and that is a narrative that appears to have been ventilated last week. And if you saw my opening monologue, you was able to see that what I did is that I went back into the history and said, no, a lot of these politicians actually got involved very young.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And that is an important point that needs to be made. But the addition to that, I think it's also important to really have a conversation about how do you define experience? What is experience? How do you define that? Right. Okay, what metric are we using? Are we talking political experience? Are we talking experience in the public service? Are we talking experience in the business community? What experience are we talking about? Life experience, right? As a fisherman in Guave or as a farmer in a rural parish? What does that mean? So please proceed.
Right. So it has to be relevant. So here is a gentleman who wants to lead the country. Lead the country means at two levels, the nation, at that level of relationship and psychology and so on, culture and so on. And on the other hand, lead us from a development point of view, because those are the two mandates of nationhood, leadership and development. So experience has to be approached from the perspective of that which is relevant. It is not about how old you are. It is what ground you have covered, what you have achieved over the period of time that you have lived, that would be relevant to the task that you see to perform now. So now this age thing, I think you began with it to put it down, dismiss it really. Age is not the critical factor. You had Roosevelt in Dominica, 32 years old. You had Holness in Jamaica, 39 years old. That's Jamaica. It's an important Caribbean country. 39. Deacon is older than he was when he became prime minister. And then, you know, my biblical mentor, Joseph, Prime Minister of Egypt at 30 years. And why? Because he had demonstrated to the king, he had demonstrated his ability to plan, his discipline, and so on. And so, therefore, he had something to show. And that is the test. What do we have to show over whatever time that we have lived that's relevant to what we are hoping to do or required to do by the Grenadian society in this context? So,
Mr. Joseph,
that's
yes.
for me.
Thank you for that. We will take a final break, and then, Mr. Joseph, when we come back, we're going to wrap up this conversation, and then you will talk to me about that tiff, or perhaps it might be a storm in a teacup that you're having with my colleague Callistra Faria. I will go to bat for my colleague, so we will get into that when we come back.
Persons like myself remaining a bystander in political development, in light, and particularly in light of the traumatic events. I gave serious consideration to it and found that I should make it right. I've had no regrets since. I am a person, once I put my hand to something, I give it my total will. Unlike other persons, I don't approach life with pessimism. I approach life with optimism. And I think for us, Grenadians, Caribbean people, and in fact, persons from the developing world, we must never be subject to the paralyzing effect of fatalism and pessimism. I am not a patient.
That was former Grenadian Prime Minister, Minister of Agriculture, a son of St. David. I am going to inject that again. I'm a proud and patriotic man from the east, the parish, they say. And, you know, people say St. David's don't have a town, but history would show that the first town in Grenada, the first colonial settlement at least, was in the parish of St. David in a place called Megrin, which is located in Rucane. You can go there and check out the ruins. Maybe there's a reason why we don't have a town now. But William, let us get into it. Before we get to the wrap up here, is there a tiff? Is there an issue? Do you have an issue with the Callistra Faria's reporting around Deacon Mitchell? What's that tiff between you and Hamlet Mark? Can you publicly, for the first time, tell us what that's all about, please?
No, I'm happy to do so. I have absolutely no quarrel with Callistra. In fact, I have a high degree of respect for Callistra. I interviewed with Callistra perhaps a week ago, if not less, and it was, you know, top class as far as I'm concerned. I respect her. I've known her for a long time, and when I prepared something that she has interpreted as a reference to her own ability to deal with things. But let me just explain this briefly. Hamlet Mark is someone who has engaged me for a long time. So we had this brief exchange recently where he said to me that he thinks that the NDC is likely to go to the right wing and that he is going to fight that ideological battle. That's how he put it. And the only reason why he raised that is because by the time he was saying it, he thought that Deacon Mitchell was likely to get the leadership of the NDC, and that Deacon Mitchell, it was said, was supposedly aligned with big business interests. So that is the notion of going right. So he and I had a short exchange regarding that. And so
turn your camera on, Willie. I think I lost Willie there. I don't know if there's a power outage or a loss of internet connectivity in Grenada. But what we want to do before we get to the conclusion of the program is to take in some of the comments from our viewers here. Sandra Davis is saying Deacon can run anywhere and win. He also love that he can even win in St. George Northwest. Even if he run on Pluto, he will win. Some enthusiasm there from a Deacon Mitchell supporter. Margaret Francis is saying, yes, I'm batting for Callistra too. Yeah, I think we're both on the same page where that is concerned. Imogen Howard is saying a politician, no one can fit in his shoes. I think she's referring to that clip with George Brizan. We have a comment here from Centella Robinson saying, Deacon is 44 years old and people don't know him at all in St. David. That is why he cannot run there. Interesting perspective. Okay, William, it looks like we did Hamlet cut your internet?
He dare not. He dare not. But so it went down. So
Yes.
I began to explain this thing. So that's where it started. This thing in Hamlet's mind that the NDC was going to go right, become a right-wing party, and that he thought that he had a duty to fight it ideologically. So that is where it came from. So when I listened to the interview and I heard talk about big money and so on, I said, well, oh, what's going on here? No. Hamlet Mark is the guiding mind behind
WPG-10, yes.
That's right. He's the guiding mind behind it. Everybody knows that. So I concluded, okay, Hamlet is at work. I did not, as a matter of fact, stop to consider, Callistra or to think that I'm targeting Callistra, as I've said to her. She was never my target. But let me tell you this. So I prepared some notes and put it on an audio, sent it to Hamlet and said, listen, tell me what you think about this. It is not yet released. And let me tell you, up to this day, I have not released it. I have not released it. And the reason why I sent it to him is because we had this conversation about right wing and so on. And because I was discussing that thing, I said, let me run it by him. Let me hear, his comments. Lo and behold, he chose not to comment politely, but to pull out some kind of garbage bag of stuff and so on. I said to him yesterday afternoon, I said, boy, you're teaching me things about myself that I never knew. You know what I mean? I get attributed, he attributes this and that in the NDC to me. I never knew I was involved in those things. I never knew that. I learned something from Jackie Kreff many years ago, 1975, at the GBSS. I had given a speech to the boys, being on the student council. And she called me one time during the break one morning, and she said, William, some people speak for acclaim, and others are acclaimed when they speak. And I have not forgotten that. And so I have tried in my discourse, in this role that I've taken upon myself as commentator, to try to say sensible things to the Grenadian public. You see, I don't engage in rah-rah, mud foolishness. I try to bring substance to whatever I have to say. Because I do my homework, at least I try to. All right? And so when I read this thing and so on from him, I wondered, what is going on here, man? This is the, political enmity is a bad thing. It's destructive. Mm-hmm. So we were on different sides in the issue regarding Peter David and so on back in the NDC, but I didn't create it. Anybody knows, familiar with the history of that thing, and Hamlet knows the truth. He knows the truth, but he chooses to run this stuff and so on as if to make me out to be some kind of foolish monster. But this is a man who has over and over asked me to come and do this for him and do that for him on his programming. And then he turns around and so on and says, this man is a fool, let him make an ass of himself. So I laugh it off and so on, and I figured, well, come on, you keep contradicting yourself, so forget it.
Yep. So, well, and we have to end the program here.
Yep.
And Willie, I'm going to give you a chance for some closing comments. And of course, I wish you and other civic-minded Grenadians would advocate for there to be a national debate between the leaders. I think it is really needed for the health of the democratic process in the country. We here at the Bub Report will be making a serious stake to ensure that we can have national debates on substantive issues in the lead up to the national elections. Grenada needs that. But I will give you a chance for some quick closing comments,
Yeah,
sir.
I agree with you entirely. It didn't come out this morning, but the way I see it, these elections are not far off.
Yeah.
So the NDC that has no honeymoon, they have to get on immediately to working out their business regarding a campaign that makes sense, that could produce some level of success. You see, but they have the right start. They have the right start. This issue of readiness to govern begins with offering the Grenadian people a leader who is credible, a leader who is respectable. He or she does not have to be the most charismatic, but must be credible and respectable and all those fine qualities. And I think we are seeing those things in Deacon Mitchell: substance, sincerity. He's obviously well connected with the working class and ordinary people. He will speak for himself. Others have begun to testify to things that he's done and been doing. But I think they now have found in him a leader they can take to the marketplace with pride. Because you have to be able to sell your leader. And then the leader has to become an engine, a political engine, really, to move the welfare of the party forward and lift everybody in the process. So for Grenada now, I think, given his relative youth, I think the right age for that to be happening. My last book, which was done on the revolution, it is subtitled "A Leadership Guide to the Young Grenadian." And so I am very, very, very encouraged that at this point in our history, we have our 40-year-olds stepping up and saying, let us get this thing done for Grenada. Those of us who are my age, 60 and over, what is our duty and responsibility? To help and guide them as far as we could. Help them. But I'm very, very clear that these young people, being who they are, it's a stock of human capital the country has at its disposal at this time that we have not had for a long, 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 long time, perhaps in our history. That stock of human capital, both in Grenada here and outside of Grenada, young professionals and technicians and so on, who don't need 20 years to learn anything. They can sift it and sort it out almost in a jiffy, and it's sound. But with the guardrails must be up and the guidance must be there and so on. And I think that's where we come in, people of my age and so on. So I think it's an encouraging time, and let the democracy flourish. Thank you so much.
Let the democracy flourish. And on that note, a cautionary tale for media workers and journalists. I beg of you, let us engage in impartial, dispassionate, well-researched journalism that illuminates the issues for the people of the country. And a cautionary tale to the political apologists on either side of the political fence. There would be occasions when you may not necessarily agree with the line of questioning of a particular journalist or agree with what they have to say, but that is the role of the journalist in a flourishing democracy, as Mr. William Joseph just said. So on that note, I wish to take the time to extend my deepest gratitude to my hardworking producers on the ground in Grenada, who really worked hard with myself to put this program together this week. I also thank our viewers and listeners for your comments and your contributions, and we welcome you to continue to participate by viewing and sharing the Bub Report as far and wide as possible. So again, on behalf of my production team, on behalf of your humble servant, I thank you again for watching the Bub Report this week. Bye-bye.